Okay, admittedly, I don't really watch too many St. Louis Blues games. Now, a lot of that is due to circumstance. I'm here in Vancouver, we watch Canucks games and Canadiens games and Senators games and whatever games are going on here in the North Division because that's kind of what the thing is over here. And proximity-wise, it doesn't really work out to get the cable, nor is it really the biggest topics over here in the city talking about the St. Louis Blues. But I will say, in the limited sample size that I have seen of the St. Louis Blues in this year's playoffs, the odd one or two games that I would catch throughout the past few seasons, as well as all the highlights and the playoff runs in the past, there's always been probably one guy that I've been super impressed with the entire time I watched St. Louis. This guy really popped out to me when they played the Vancouver Canucks back in 2020 in the bubble in Edmonton, and he was by far, in my opinion, the most effective and one of the most just overall annoying players to play against, while also having the edge of being able to score and do things defensively as well. Today we're talking about Jaden Schwartz, a guy who I have been a super big fan of the past few seasons, and totally not because one time in 2015 I took him on my fantasy team, not knowing who he was, and he eventually did really well for me. Totally not the case here. But Jaden Schwartz is a St. Louis Blues forward who is 29 years old, 5'10", 190 pounds. He is a left-wing guy who is currently a free agent. There are contract negotiations that need to go down with him and the St. Louis Blues, but because the Seattle Kraken expansion draft is coming up, he is currently, technically, an unprotected forward on the Blues team. He also was at half a point a game this season with 21 points in 40 games. Honestly, a pretty down year for what he was able to accomplish previously in his career. Last year in 71 games, he had 57 points and 20 goals, 4 points in 9 games played in the Stanley Cup bubble. He was under a point per game in the Stanley Cup run with the Blues in 2019. He had a career high of 63 points in 75 games back in 2015, and he has been a consistent 20-goal-ish kind of guy pretty much the majority of his career so far. It's also pretty good too because when he's not scoring goals, hey, he's going out there, he's getting assists. Also off the puck, he plays like an absolute madman, making things really difficult for the opponent, and that's always been a quality that I've admired in Schwartz's game, especially against Vancouver in the bubble last year. But because he is in this peculiar spot, he needs a contract, he could be a free agent, he's a good NHL player, we have ourselves some teams out there that are going to be interested in taking a look at where he goes. This is what Elliotte Friedman said on the recent episode of the 31 Thoughts podcast. He says that Seattle really likes Jaden Schwartz, but he has also heard Vancouver is in there, Colorado too if they lose Landeskog, and Los Angeles in there too. Friedman says, don't be surprised if Schwartz ends up being Seattle's pick from St. Louis. And before we get any further than that, hey, about 3.5 hours from this video's upload time, we're going to be streaming on this channel for the Seattle expansion draft. Join us at 3:30 p.m. PDT for some great pre-draft discussion. It's always a fun time chatting it up with the people out there, and we're going to be streaming the entire thing live as it happens as well, so you can go ahead, check it out, get your live reactions in there with all of us in the chat. It's going to be a great time, but they like him so much to the point that they might actually take him. That's a really interesting proposition right here. We're going to talk about Vancouver, we're going to talk about Colorado, and we're also going to talk about the LA Kings too for sure. But starting things off with the Seattle Kraken and their apparent interest in Jaden Schwartz. It's a really risky kind of move, in my opinion, to consider either option. If you really like this guy, try to go out there using a draft slot on him and trying to sign him afterwards, because you could realistically say, okay, well, if you really want Jaden Schwartz, why don't you just draft anybody else, like a Vince Dunn, for example? It's a little bit different there because, hey, he's an RFA instead of a UFA. You sign Dunn to a contract, and then you go after Schwartz in free agency. Would you not just be able to double down like that? And you know what? It is a really interesting perspective, but at the end of the day, negotiating rights are a pretty big deal. And if you're the St. Louis Blues and you're already kind of insecure that you're not even going to be able to keep Schwartz around in general, then, it might actually be kind of a good thing for the Blues to have something like this happen, where they're like, okay, we're going to take the guy whose rights are expiring on your team, snag him up, and then we're going to sign him later. It's like, okay, did St. Louis even really lose anybody in the expansion draft because they just lost somebody they would have lost anyway? So you'd be honestly doing the Blues a solid if you just went out there and you were like, yeah, let's get the UFA expiring guy. instead of trying to go after somebody else like an RFA who's restricted or a contract that already exists within the organization, and then you try to sign whoever it is in free agency that you like, maybe like an Ovechkin or maybe like a Schwartz or maybe like a Landeskog, whatever. Speaking about Landeskog, let's go over to Colorado because I know we're skipping Vancouver, but Colorado is in there. If they lose Gabriel Landeskog, they might go after Jaden Schwartz. Okay, now, in my opinion, Schwartz is not as good as Landeskog is. We already made our video the other day talking about Gabriel Landeskog and the qualities that he brings to an NHL club. He's a very good player. He's been the captain for a long freaking time. There's a reason this guy was one of the youngest captains ever named in the NHL when he was like 19 years old or whatever it was. He's fantastic. But at the end of the day, he's going to demand a lot more money than a Jaden Schwartz would. Take a look at what Jaden Schwartz was making previously. He was out there coming off of what was a 5-year contract at $5-something million a season that he signed back in 2016. And that was honestly a pretty good contract for what Schwartz was able to bring. I think getting 57 points in 71 games out of a $5.3 million player, that's fantastic. But he does have the right to go out there and maybe ask for a little bit more money. I just don't really know if that's going to be in the same tier as a Gabriel Landeskog. Things get a lot more interesting as well when you consider the fact that we already spoke about how Gabriel Landeskog might just want to go to St. Louis if he doesn't go to Colorado because he's really good friends with Ryan O'Reilly. If Landy goes over to the Blues and Schwartz goes over to the Avs, you would literally just have a Landeskog for Schwartz swap. And it's essentially a trade at that point, and if you go that route and you try to label it out, oh, who's more valuable, who's this, who's that, obviously the contract changes the conversation a little bit, but I still think, in my opinion, that Landeskog is the better player. So for St. Louis, man, I don't know what you guys got to do here. Maybe some wheeling and dealing needs to go on to maybe try to either swap the negotiation rights if you really want to do that, add a draft pick or whatever. There are some things that you can do here to try to make yourselves come out on top if you're the St. Louis Blues in this situation. Talking about the Vancouver Canucks, so there have actually been Canucks rumors linked to Jaden Schwartz the past few days. I just hadn't really had the time to talk about them. And as I said, man, I'm a Vancouver guy. I watch the Canucks. They're my favorite team, and I keep up with all the games. He has been the #1 guy that I've been the most impressed by every time the Vancouver Canucks play against St. Louis. Jaden Schwartz, 100%. So to hear that Benning and all the guys up there up top in Vancouver also feel the same way, yo, that guy's great. If he's available on the market, we want to get him. Doesn't surprise me at all. He would add a nice little element there to the Canucks middle six that, honestly, not too many players have, of really nice, intense puck-carrying ability, skill, and speed to boot, not to mention the fact that he can be a little bit feisty off the puck as well. The Canucks, honestly, are a little bit passive with some of their forwards, so a guy like Jaden Schwartz should really inject a brand new energy within the lineup there. Furthermore, you also have the conversations to go about with where does he actually play, because the Lotto line, Miller, Pettersson, Besser, is the first line. You'd likely have Horvat, Höglander, and maybe Tanner Pearson as the second line. Do you play Jaden Schwartz on the third line with Jason Dickinson and Vasily Podkolzin? Oh man, that sounds fantastic. Podkolzin and Schwartz on the same line, bro. That sounds great. Of course, though, Vancouver is kind of a pipe dream at this point. They don't really have too much money that I think they're just free to spend wherever they want. So, I mean, even though I'm kind of liking the idea of a Jaden Schwartz over to Vancouver, we criticized the Canucks and the idea of them going after free agents when we spoke about Zach Hyman, so it's kind of unfair to not mention that when you're bringing up Jaden Schwartz, who also will cost a boatload of money too. Furthermore, for the LA Kings, they're a team that's kind of really retooling quickly. Like, I didn't realize this until I really sat down and thought about it and realized that the LA Kings have gone from what was a bad team, a dumpster team, a second overall caliber team in 2019-20 to now, which is essentially really gearing up towards maybe making a wildcard spot in the Pacific Division. This team has gotten better fast, and we've spoken about it a ton over the past few months, that their young core, their prospects, all their guys, they're really good guys, and I love the prospect system that the LA Kings have had and nurtured over the past few seasons here. So to see guys like Turcotte, Velarde, Byfield eventually graduate and eventually do some pretty good things, hey, it'd be really nice to see a Jaden Schwartz go out there and act as a veteran presence. Another one of these cup-winning guys to add to your squad, because of course the LA Kings need more Stanley Stanley Cup champions on their roster. So I think LA could be a really good fit. I just don't really know how enticed a guy like Schwartz would want to be in signing with LA compared to the St. Louis's or the Vancouvers or the Colorados or whatever. It's just a mixed bag depending on who you ask, I guess, right? But either way, talk to me in the comments if you're a Kings, Avalanche, Blues, or Canucks fan, what you think about Jaden Schwartz and the potential of him signing a free agent contract. Also talk about Seattle as well, because they might go out there and just choose the guy from St. Louis later today. Also check out the channel for the expansion draft live stream that we're going to be doing. I hope you enjoyed this Visage Rolls 99. And bye.